Some points of clarification this morning after U.S. President Donald Trump spent most of his 147-minute State of the Union address last night talking about how he made America great again.
Members of Congress and my fellow Americans, our nation is back, bigger, better, richer, and stronger than ever before.
Following a crushing blow by the U.S. Supreme Court over his tariff plan and low approval ratings, the U.S. president defended his economic policies and made the case that America has only improved under his leadership. For a closer look at the speech and how it was received, we're joined this morning by Eric Ham, CTV News political analyst. Good morning and welcome, Eric.
It's good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Listen, there was a lot to look at, a lot to listen to. We had some hockey players, we had a political prisoner freed, but what moments stood out the most to you?
Well, this was going to be a very difficult sell for the president. We know that his approval ratings have been cratering. And of course, that massive ruling by the Supreme Court just a few days ago was certainly going to upend the White House. And President Donald Trump not only needed to reassure an anxious American public, but he also had to assure many of those lawmakers, Republicans in the room, that he understood the plight of what was happening. And given the fact that there is growing concern that they themselves are in jeopardy of losing control of both chambers of Congress, the president needed to not only provide a vision for where he was taking the country, but also a concrete plan. And I don't think we saw enough of that from the president. You're right. We got a lot of performance. We got a lot of theatrics. But I think that's not going to be enough to reassure the American people about what this president is doing, particularly on pocketbook issues.
Trump opened his speech by saying the country has turned itself around and that the State of the Union is strong. Is that the reality in America?
Not at all. In fact, many Americans are still concerned about rising prices, high inflation. The president talked about the tariffs and how his plan is actually working, how he is actually returning America to this great place. And in addition to that, he talks about the $175 billion that the country has brought in, which is actually a drop in the bucket when you look at America's growing deficit, which is now nearing $30 trillion. In addition to that, what we're seeing is these taxes, these tariffs, which the president says that global nations are paying, simply is not true. This is a tax on all Americans, and right now they just are concerned about the growing weight of rising prices that they're confronted with every single day.
And on this show, we've spoken to certain people who say they're starting to feel that now. Farmers in America, for example, are starting to feel the impact of tariffs because things like fertilizer are more expensive. Perhaps, Eric, as a pain point from low approval ratings and a look ahead to the November midterms, which you mentioned, Trump hammered the Democrats for everything from the affordability crisis to refusing to fund the Department of Homeland Security's Trump enforcement plan and for immigration. So what does this strategy do for his approval ratings, which are tumbling right now?
Quite frankly, nothing at all. And in fact, I think many of those Republicans where we saw a unified front with many Republicans rejoicing, providing ovations to the president for his speech, I think they still walked out of there deeply, deeply concerned. We saw moments, of course, where the president excoriated Democrats for refusing to stand, refusing to support many of the policies that he was pushing last night. In fact, many Democrats decided not to even show up for the State of the Union last night. And again, I think what we're seeing here is a president who is actually falling into the same trap that many believe former President Joe Biden did refusing to recognize the problems that many Americans are facing. And quite frankly, it's only going to get worse because, as we know, President Donald Trump has now implemented those Section 122 tariffs, which includes a 15% tariff on all goods coming into the country. And now Congress is going to have to weigh in on this issue. And this could, I think, pit a major battle between the president and the Congress over their refusal to renew these taxes heading into the midterm elections.
And Trump, you know, as a reminder to everybody, his very first address in his second administration was that the tariff plan was the way forward. He was going to recreate the golden age in America. So he is not budging on that plan. Also, during his speech, Eric, he said he wants to solve the conflict with Iran through diplomacy. But he wants the Iranian regime to agree to abandon their nuclear program. Meantime, the U.S. has ramped up its military capabilities near Tehran. How do you interpret Trump's comments about diplomacy? I mean, we're just looking at least one of the Air Force carriers that are on their way over or parked there now.
You know, we cannot, I think, be lost on the fact that there was an actual nuclear agreement in place that actually put a cap on Iran's nuclear capabilities. And it was President Donald Trump during his first term that actually walked away from that. Now the United States is ramping up its military assets in the region, looking as though we're preparing for war, if in fact there is no deal, as the president says, in 10 days. And again, what does this mean for a very weary nation that, quite frankly, does not want to see military intervention in the Middle East again? And I think right now, this is where it looks as though the president is, in fact, taking the country. And even though many Republicans are remaining quiet on this, I think very much like what we see on the tariffs, there is growing concern about what the president is doing in the region.
Because we never know what is going to happen when U.S. President Donald Trump speaks, whether it's on Air Force One or a State of the Union address, Canadians were listening to hear more, possibly about tariffs or trade, following Trump's 10% global tariffs hike last week. So based on what you heard and the recent Supreme Court decision, what should Canadians be preparing for?
I think Donald Trump needed to not only reassure people that he had a plan that he was prepared to implement regarding the economy, but also he needed to assure people that there would be less, not more, unpredictability from him. And I think even for Canadians that were watching last night, what you saw was a man who had been stripped, had been shackled, had been neutered both by the courts as well as from Congress, appearing to look strong and trying desperately to show the world that he still has leverage, even though he does not when it comes to these tariffs. And so I think what that means is we're going to see an even more unpredictable president, a more volatile president, when right now that's the last thing the American people and the rest of the world needs or wants from President Donald Trump.
Eric Ham, CTV News political analyst, joining us from Washington this morning. Thanks, Eric.
All right, you bet. Thank you.